Saqib, welcome back. Thank
you
you so much for joining us again. We are continuing our series on propaganda, and we are looking today at Islam and propaganda. What, particularly, Islamophobia, and how it's evolved over the years. So, Islamophobia back then, Islamophobia today, and where do you think the trajectory of Islamophobia, because it's not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to start with this was a quote that we saw recently from Charlie Kirk, a tweet, I think. Right, where he says that Islam is incompatible with Western civilization.
Yes.
Right?
So the context is this: we just had this Boulder shooting, and that incident, and then in response, obviously with a terrorist incident, he decides to go back to the classic sort of trope. But it felt a very sort of cliched type of expression. And just even going through the responses in that tweet, even from conservatives or red-blooded white Americans, it was not really landing the punch that you really expected to 20 years ago, say, for example, in the middle of the war on terror
absolutely.
Of Bush. So I thought that was quite interesting. And it also tells something of the mood of the American public, that they're not necessarily as viscerally triggered by Muslims to the same extent. I'm not saying that they're completely free of this sort of Islamophobia virus, but they're not necessarily as triggered to that extent as you'd expect, at the height of the Bush years. So that was very interesting, but it also felt so tired and so uninspired in terms of a propaganda use.
Yeah,
right?
It was lazy.
Yeah, that okay, we need to press the fear button. I need to keep pressing it. Why isn't it working? Like you're going in an elevator and you're waiting for the elevator to come, and you just keep pressing the button knowing that it won't change.
But Saka, I think we've seen like a lot of these tropes now failing, right? Like we're seeing the decline. Like either people are asking for something different, right? Or it's just not appealing anymore. And I think you're right that there is a certain fatigue related to post 9/11ism, if you will, right?
Yes.
What happened after 9/11, the response. I think people want to break out of that, because that was an atmosphere of fear, immense fear, right? Not just in the U.S. where it was on steroids, but all across the world, right?
Yes.
It was sitting here in Pakistan. You had this innate fear that terrorism is an issue. The U.S. can do whatever it wants. It is it's filled with rage, and right now it can invade anything. We got responses at that point like, we'll bomb you back to the Stone Age if you don't cooperate with us. So I think we've moved on from that. And
well, I wouldn't necessarily jump the gun. I would say in American sense, perhaps.
Okay.
If you go to Europe, there are a rise of a lot of sort of right-wing nationalist parties who are pushing a sort of fear of Muslim migration, a fear of sort of Muslim demographic takeover, which is, of course, exaggerated or just fanciful anyways. And they're presenting that in a way that is sort of expressly Islamophobic. Geert Wilders in Netherlands, but you even had right-wing mobs in Britain last year.
But even in the US, isn't this what Elon Musk is promoting, that you need race mixing shouldn't be taking place, and that the white race will eventually be
he's sort of portraying that there is a sense of sort of white victimhood, I guess you could say, right? That you almost felt this with the use of the word genocide when it came to the white South African farmers that President Trump was sort of purporting happened. But I don't know if that necessarily applies to Islamophobia, right? I think Islamophobia is something that is still existing as a phenomenon, but depending on where it's been used or overused, it can have a limiting effect, or it can still have some practical policy implications. I think it's important to define the term. So when we say Islamophobia, we generally mean a fear of Islam as a phenomenon, or a fear of Muslims as a people, beyond, you could say, any sort of rational basis, like an irrational fear. So for a person necessarily critiquing the religion, or expressing some doubts about Muslim people or criticism, that's not necessarily should not necessarily be classified as Islamophobia, you know. But when you go into saying, you know, we're witnessing a Sharia takeover of the government, or you know, there's an opening of a mosque in a town and suddenly some people's hair is on fire, that would be considered an irrational response, right? And you almost have people critique the term because they say it should be defined as anti-Muslim bigotry. I just think that we're sort of past that point. It's a label, it's stuck.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I think, like, when you say compared to anti-Semitism, right? Yeah. Anti-Semitism is something that, you know, someone's pushed the panic alarm at that point. Yeah. Where it is such a, you know, people immediately recognize this is something that is has negative connotations. It is a wrong act. It is a social crime, if you will, to say that. And there's a huge history behind it as well. Yeah. Islamophobia, as you mentioned, is a fear. Like, when you frame it, right, it's people can do a lot of things in fear, right? And it's almost justified that you can do. But that's not really the case. We are talking about a form of bigotry that is taking place there. There is a form of hatred that is involved. So would it not be better to have a term, or at least try to reframe Islamophobia as something like that? Because, again, phobia, when it comes to the hatred of people, I think is an inappropriate term to
I think because even those who want to defend themselves under allegations of Islamophobia say that, okay, I'm not afraid of anything, right? So you're misapplying the label. What we really, I think, critics of the term would really say is you'd want to defend against active hostility towards Muslims, which probably the term Islamophobia doesn't really quite capture. Exactly. But yeah, I just argue we're past that point where we can sort of change the label. It's just about using it and applying it in a more, I guess, coherent and relevant way. The same with anti-Semitism. You know, the accusation is that, oh, well, Arabs are Semitic people, so this is a misused label. It's not really applicable. I would say, okay, maybe technically true, but it's sort of, we're past the point where you can take away the term.
Now it's settled.
And you sort of have to use it and then decide, okay, is it being used to just politically defend Israel, or is it actually expressed hostility towards Jewish people collectively? And you just have to have discernment, I suppose, in when you use it. But yeah, Islamophobia really sort of got a cachet around the Bush era. That's where the most sort of visceral and dumbest expressions started coming.
You're 100%. You know, I agree with you on that. So there's forms of Islamophobia. The good thing about hate is that you can often recognize it. But the most insidious form of hate is hate in the most respectable newspapers that is published by respectable authors, that really on the face of it, you know, seems completely justified and seems, you know, a rational argument is built around it. And, you know, the Washington Post will put things out, and you'll have the New York Times and things like that. That I find to be really insidious and really damaging.
Well, Islamophobia, unlike anti-Semitism, is institutionalized to a larger extent among different institutions in the West. That expression of it is not considered a taboo, right? It's considered part of, you know, acceptable political discourse. And there, you know, you're going to have large sections of the voting public that sort of defend that type of rhetoric. So it's not really, there's no stigma attached to it.
There are no consequences.
Yeah, except if you go really overboard. But even then, I mean, you had, you know, Islam being attacked by President Trump. I mean, he expressly said Islam hates us when he was running in 2017. He's sort of, you know, given a pass on that, and really people have sort of moved on. So I just sort of wonder really where, you know, the rhetoric sometimes gets so hyperbolic and cartoonish that people have been numbed to what the connotations really mean.
Look, I mean, I want to give you an example. So you remember that debate that Mehdi Hassan was having on CNN, where the other guy said, "I hope your beeper doesn't go off."
Right.
Your pager doesn't go off.
Recently,
right? That was, you know, he was kicked off the show. And that was something that was considered really, I don't know if it was, I mean, it certainly had an Islamophobic tone to it.
Would you call it Islamophobic though?
Yeah, so, I mean, look, he's comparing an Islamic terrorist group that was targeted, however you want to label Hezbollah, and he was saying that Mehdi Hassan, because he's supporting the Palestinian cause, which again is these are vast issues that but the unifying factor, in my opinion, would be Islam, right? That these are
well, I think that he probably would say that even if Mehdi Hassan was not Muslim, like if it was any other journalist, I think it's just that toxicity of holding that position of supporting Palestinians gets this sort of extreme response. That's just my sense of it.
Say it was a white man in Mehdi Hassan's position. He was supporting
possibly he wouldn't say it.
I think he would have still said it. I just don't think he would have been kicked off the show. Right? I think there is a sensitivity to it. Like, it means something else when you say it to a brown man, right? And the underlying or the assumed message is that it is Islamophobia in that context. So I think there is nuance to it, right? It's not just what you say, how you say it, but it's also who you say it to.
That's true.
And there's a subjective appreciation of an insult or a statement that means something completely different in that regard. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is that we keep on hearing on Twitter and this and that, a statement will be made about Muslims, which if you were simply to change the Muslim part to Jewish, there'd be hue and cry. This person would lose his job, the newspaper would issue an apology, things like that. Will it ever get to a stage where, close to 2 billion Muslims will be, anything said against them will be at the same level? Or is it because our numbers are so high that...
I don't think it's because numbers are so high. I think there's many factors. I mean, one is, of course, just decades of Western stereotypes about Muslims, right? And the fact that our regions are all associated with conflict and, the worst sort of abuses and aggressions and terrorism, all this stuff, means just as a sad default, is that lives lost tend to be cheapened. Like Muslim blood is considered cheap.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the undertone behind the entire Gaza conflict, right? The massacre. That the only reason that Westerners are considering this many people dead acceptable is because they happen to be a largely Muslim population. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, there's no way that many Europeans mass killed in a sort of one-sided conflict. I mean, we're not talking about Ukraine and Russia. Those are two armed sides fighting. We're talking about just civilians sort of being
bombarded.
Militarily massacred. Well, that's not going to be really defended if they're not Muslim.
Yeah.
So that is unfortunately, I don't think it's going to change. And maybe to be a bit self-critical, it could also be because Muslim populations themselves we don't hold our same degree of reverence for human life. If you think about just our own Muslim countries, I mean, we have so many conflicts that are happening, right? So we can't be just pointing fingers at the West. I mean, I do think that it goes in many sides. Like, if you ask Muslims how many people died in Ukraine, for example, right? I mean, there's largely indifference to that conflict because, it's not our conflict.
That's true. And also, there's a lot of debate on the numbers there.
There's a debate on the numbers, but definitely, I mean,
it's not our conflict. You're right.
I mean, Russia, even if you side with Russia, well, Russia's lost over 100,000 soldiers, right?
Yeah.
And you have similar numbers in Ukraine, but I don't see much debate in Muslim countries about that, or even discussion or sympathy with one side or the other. So we can't be selective. We can't be hypocritical about it. But at the same time, yes, definitely is there an Islamophobic element to why those people aren't necessarily... this loss is not given its full weight. I mean, that's true from the institutionalized Western elite.
Saqib, I also think it's a post-colonial issue, like a huge one, right? That undercurrent is certainly there, where Muslims are now realizing or getting under or lifting off that weight that colonization imposed on us, the encumbrances of not just physical colonization, but colonization of the mind, right? And where we felt inferior. and we were backward in education. These things. And now Muslims across the world, right? They're regaining that. And I think, a really interesting symptom or example of this was that Turkish TV show Ertugrul.
Yes.
Right? It was phenomenally popular in Pakistan and in many parts of the world. Why? Because I think for the first time you saw a Muslim hero, right, who in a decently produced show, vanquishing the enemies of Islam and reliving that, that glorious era of Islamic history that we've read about, but we've never felt.
Right, not a Hollywood hero.
Exactly, not a because and in Hollywood, up till now,
a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy.
Exactly, exactly. And in Hollywood, up till very recently, I would say continuously so, where every brown man was the villain. Right?
Yeah.
If you were an Arab, you would speak funny, you would wear funny clothes, or if you're a Muslim, you would be the other guy on the opposing end, or you would always have a negative thing to do about it.
I think it's changed the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think it's changed over there.
Definitely, it was the worst in the mid 2000s. You had so
caricatures.
Many, Jack Bauer trying to find the Muslim terrorist of the week, right? And the message was that either Muslims are, peace-loving hippies or they're terrorists, right? And that Islam is peace, except you don't know which Muslim could actually be a secret terrorist, could blow you up. It could be your nice neighbor. That was sort of the subtext of a lot of the shows. I think that just became a bit tired as a characterization, so they sort of nuanced it.
Yeah, Homeland. I mean, if you look at so many shows where the premise was, and I think people got tired of that, frankly. And it was good to see, like when it comes to Ertugrul or things like that, good to see a Muslim hero. And I think it was necessary, like we needed it in Pakistan as well. And you see this then across the world, like even Pakistan's victory, if you will, against India, for example, it's being celebrated in other parts of the world. Right, like we've seen Arabs who are giving us high fives, and the Arab street perhaps is happy about it. Not necessarily their governments. We saw in Palestine, kids flying Pakistani flags through the rubble that was going on there. So I think that has a role to play in the Muslim spirit or the collective consciousness. Absolutely.
I mean, it's hard to know because it could be just a symptom of Gaza because there's this vast sense of helplessness and defeat and despondency, and in that you have certain Muslim countries, fighting against other larger countries that and it's seemingly under attack. So
but countries who have also been very pro-Israel.
Right, exactly. So it definitely was seen as a proxy war.
Yeah.
I know that there are many sort of Zionists who are expressly supporting India during the recent conflict. So it did get portrayed in those terms, I think. I'm not sure this clash of civilization narrative, right, which really became common with Samuel Huntington, and then it fed into the war on terror. I think that it's been revived, but in the terms of a Western, you could say, identity crisis, where they feel that there is a sense of loss at their own traditional identity, and that it's under threat with this new generation that's coming of Gen X or Gen Z, more connected, woke type of youth who have a very different and very connected and universal view of the world, and that the older generation that was more rooted in a traditional sense of identity is going to disappear. So there is a resurgence of nativism, and that causes a sort of reaction against Muslim perceived outsiders. So I think that is where the Islamophobia is being expressed today. Whereas before, it was more an outward thing. There are these Muslim barbarians outside who we need to fight against. It's like a modern crusade. Whereas now it's more at home and really connecting to this sort of Western identity crisis that I think is not really solvable. It's going to persist for a number of years. That's my sense of it.
The revolution will be live.